After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the meaning of variable, understand the concept of different types of variables, and learn about the validity of a research and its types. Introduction. In its most common definition, anything that varies is known as a variable. However, in a scientific manner, it is defined with more precision and accuracy, like variables are the conditions or characteristics that can be controlled, manipulated and observed by the researcher during the process of research. In other words, variables are those dimensions of objects, things, etc. that can be measured for research gains, like intelligence, anxiety, attitude, aptitude, etc., etc. These are all examples of variables used in psychological research. A variable is often represented as a symbol. For example, x is a variable that is to be quantified. Variables can be categorized in many ways to enhance the validity of the research. We shall explore all these as we progress through the module. Two qualities for which a researcher endeavors for in his research are reliability and validity in his results. Validity is the confidence that our research has in fulfilling its purpose. The research that serves the aim of applying its results to solution of the problems is a valid research. If the research does not fulfill its purpose, it is said to be invalid. There is a subtle difference in reliability and validity of a research. Let us take up the example of a watch. Without its cell, it will never work as it does not show time. Such a watch is reliable because no matter how many times we look at it, it is reliable that it is not going to tell us the time. But this watch is not valid because it is not fulfilling its purpose, that is, telling us the time. The different type of variables are diagrammatically shown. We can find the various type mentioned here: dependent, independent, extraneous, confounding, continuous, categorical, observable, intervening, and in the preceding sections we are going to discuss them in detail. Types of variables. Dependent variable. Dependent variable is the variable or factor that researchers expect to change as a function of change in the independent variable. It is also known as the response variable. For example, if the experimenter wants to study the effect of sex, that is male and female, upon attitude towards interpersonal relationships, then the dependent variable is the attitude towards interpersonal relationship. The dependent variable must be reliable so as it must act systematically with respect to independent variable. It should also be delicate as it must change in accordance with the independent variable, and to be valid, the dependent variable must measure what it means to measure. Measuring the dependent variable. To measure the dependent variable, following approaches are undertaken. The first approach can be direct observation of the targeted behavior, where the experimenter observes directly and measures the intended behavior. For example, in a study by Schachter in 1968, measuring the eating behavior measured the amount of food eaten by the subject as a function of different eating cues present. Second approach is a mirror reflection of the direct approach, where the dependent variable works with the observable response which is unseen. Sometimes the experimenter tends to measure the blood pressure, heart rate, etc. are the example. Self-report is another kind of measure where the dependent variable is obtained by self-reports of the subject. In these kinds of report, the subjects are asked to express their feelings, attitudes and interests about the stimulus given to them. The other measure tends to be the judgment about a stimulus, where the subject is asked to make judgment about the independent variable introduced. The independent variable. The independent variable, or IV as we are going to refer to it as, the independent variable refers to the variable or factor that the researcher deliberately manipulates in a formal experiment or selected and categorized in non-experimental research for producing the change independent variable. It is also known as control variable. For example, if the experimenter wants to study the effect of sex, that is male and female, upon attitude towards interpersonal relationships, the independent variable is the sex. The independent variable is manipulated by the experimenter and is classified on the basis of the nature of the variables. Thus, changes in the dependent variable depend on the changes in the independent variable. Classification of independent variable. Independent variables can be classified into three categories. First is the environmental variables. It is those characteristics of the environment which are not included in the undertaking process but may produce a change in the behavior. For example, variables like temperature, noise, day or night, etc. are examples of environmental variables. For example, we may find that in an examination hall, the noise of traffic may distort the examiner's point of view of giving an examination. Task variables. These variables refer to the characteristics which are linked with behavioral tasks presented to the subject. The physical characteristics of setup and many features of the task are included in the task variable. Subject variables. Subject variables are those characteristics of the subject that produce change in the behavioral patterns like mood, intelligence, sex, weight, age are considered some of the subject variables. Some examples of the independent and dependent variables. The following is the hypothesis of a study. Let us take it up as an example. First is, there will be a statistically significant difference in graduation rates of at-risk high school seniors who participate in an intensive study program as opposed to at-risk high school seniors who do not participate in an intensive study program. This study was conducted by LaFontaine and Bartos to understand this and explore this hypothesis. Let us understand the kind of variables that were chosen and taken up for the research. The independent variable to test such a hypothesis would be participation in intensive study program. The dependent variable will be graduation rates. A director of residential living on a large university campus is concerned about the large turnover rate in resident assistants. In recent years, many residents assistants have left their positions before completing even 1 year in their assignments. The director wants to identify the factors that predict commitment as a resident assistant, defined as continuing in the position for minimum of 2 years. The director decides to assess the knowledge of the position, attitude towards residential policies, and ability to handle conflicts as predictors for commitment to the position. This study was taken up by LaFontaine and Bartos in 2002. If this is the study, then what should be the independent and dependent variables explored to establish the findings? The independent variables in such study can be knowledge of position, attitude towards policies, and the ability to handle conflicts. The dependent variables can be commitment to position, that is continuing in the position for 2 years or not continuing. So, we can understand how hypothesis and the problem that are taken up help us in understanding and identifying the dependent and dependent variables that would suffice the purpose of the study. Extraneous variables. Extraneous variables are those variables that are not part of the manipulation. That is, they are the factors we haven't controlled. Extraneous variables may affect our results, but usually they affect all our conditions equally, and so they do not create any biases in our results. They may affect the dependent variable, but the main idea should be that how do we control the extraneous variable. Let us explore it by taking up an example. Let us say that an educational psychologist has developed a new learning strategy and is interested in examining the effectiveness of this strategy. The experimenter randomly assigns students to 2 groups. All of the students study text materials on a biology topic for 30 minutes. One group uses the new strategy and the other one uses a strategy of their choice. Then all students complete a test over the materials. One obvious confounding variable in this case would be the pre-knowledge of biology topic that was studied. That is, before the students were given the topic to be studied, they must have some knowledge of biology which may be different in each of the subject. Now, this variable will most likely influence students' scores regardless of which strategy they have used. Because of this extraneous variable, and of course there will be many more such variables, there will be some spread within each of the group. It would be better, of course, if all students come in with exactly the same pre-knowledge. However, the experimenter has taken an important step to greatly increase the chances that at least the extraneous variable will add error variance equivalently between the groups. That is, the experimenter randomly assigned the students to the two groups. So, random assignment may be one of the methods to control the effect of the extraneous variables on research. Yes, we are going to explore many more such techniques. There are three important ways by which we can control extraneous variables. First is controlling extraneous variables by the technique of elimination. By eliminating the extraneous variable completely from the experimental setup. For example, if noise of traffic is an extraneous variable, then the simple way to control it is by making the setup soundproof. By sometimes this technique is very difficult to manage, like variables in age, sex, etc., which cannot be completely eliminated. The constant conditions are other ways to control the extraneous variable. When extraneous variables cannot be controlled by elimination technique, this technique comes to the rescue by making it a constant. For example, making the conditions like temperature, lightning, instructions constant for all the participants. Sometimes extraneous variables like age, sex, etc. become important. To control these variables, this technique is used, like selecting a homogeneous data that equal number of males and females may be chosen. As we discussed before, randomization is the next method. It is the most favorite and popular technique of controlling extraneous variable. Under this technique, each member of the population or universe has independent and equal chance of getting selected without any biases. Confounding variables. In statistics, a confounding variable, also confounding factor, hidden variable or a confound is an extraneous variable in a statistical model that correlates directly or inversely with both the dependent variable and the independent variable. For example, there is a statistical relationship between frozen yogurt consumption and number of drowning deaths for a given period. These two variables have a positive correlation with each other. An experimenter explains this correlation by inferring a causal relationship between the two variables. That is, either that frozen yogurt consumption causes drowning or that drowning causes frozen yogurt consumption. However, a more likely explanation is that the relationship between ice cream consumption and drowning is false, and that a third confounding variable, that is the season, influences both variables. During the summers, warmer temperatures lead to increased frozen yogurt consumption as well as more people swim and thus the drowning death occurs. In another concrete example, say one is studying the relationship between birth order, that is the first, second and third child etc., and the presence of Down syndrome in the child. In this scenario, maternal age would be a confounding variable. Higher maternal age is directly associated with Down syndrome in child. Higher maternal age is directly associated with Down syndrome regardless of birth order. A mother having her first versus third child at age 50 confers the same risk. Maternal age is directly associated with birth order. The second child, except in the case of twins, is born when the mother is older than when she was for the birth of the first child. Maternal age is not a consequence of birth order. Having a second child does not change the mother's age. Types of confounding variable. Confounding variables can be categorized into three types. An operational confounding can occur in both experimental and non-experimental research designs. This type of confounding occurs when a measure designed to assess a particular construct inadvertently measures something else as well. A procedural confounding is when in a laboratory experiment, this type of confounding occurs when the researcher unconsciously allows another variable to change along with the manipulated independent variable. A person confounding occurs when two or more groups of units are analyzed together. Example, workers from different occupations, despite varying according to one or more other observed or unobserved characteristic. Example, gender. Continuous variable. Curlinger in 1973 defined a continuous variable is capable of taking on an ordered set of values within a certain range. This definition means first that the values of a continuous variable reflect at least a rank order, a large value of the variable meaning more of the property in question than a smaller value. The values yielded by a scale to measure dogmatism, for instance, express differing amount of dogmatism from high through medium to low. Second, continuous measures in actual use are contained in a range and each individual obtains a score within the range. A scale to measure dogmatism may have a range 1 through 7. Categorical variable. Curlinger in 1973 defined categorical variables as they belong to a kind of measurement called nominal. In nominal measurement, there are two or more subsets of the set of objects being measured. Individuals are categorized by their position of the characteristic that define any subset. To categorize means to assign an object to a subclass or subset of a class or set on the basis of the objects having or not having the characteristics that define the subset. The simplest examples are dichotomous variables, which are categorical in nature, like sex, male or female, then your political affiliation, as in US, Republican or Democrat. Observable and intervening variable. Intervening variables are also known as constructs. It is a term invented to account for internal and directly unobservable psychological process that in turn account for behavior. Curlinger in 1973 defined like this. It is different from observable variables in the simple sense that observable behaviors are observable. Validity of research. Validity is a very important phenomenon in scientific research. In its most common sense, validity means truth and its concerned with legitimacy. Thus, it refers to the degree of which a test measures what it intends to measure. It is the extent to which a measurement is well founded and to which the measurement corresponds accurate to the real world. Students often get confused and think that a valid study is one where the researcher finds support for his or her hypothesis. This is not the case. A valid result is a correct result in terms of what is really true as opposed to what the researcher thought would be true. All research strives to be high in validity. Any flaws must be minimized in order to draw valid conclusions from a study. There are two main types of validity: internal validity, which concerns what goes on inside a study, whether the researcher tested what he or she intended to test, and it is the validity of the measurement and the test itself. Some of the factors which affect internal validity are subject variability, size of subject population, time given for the data collection or experimental treatment, history, attrition, maturation, and instrument or task sensitivity. The external validity concerns things outside a study, the extent to which the results of the study can be generalized to other situations and people. The term ecological validity is often used as another term for external validity. Both are very important terms in analyzing the appropriateness and usefulness of a research study. Some of the factors that affect the external validity are population characteristics, interaction of subject selection and research, descriptive explicitness of the independent variable, the effect of research environment, researcher or experimenter effects, data collection methodology, the effect of time. Let us take up an example to explain the concept a bit further. A researcher wishes to study if absence makes heart grow fonder. The study can be conducted by perhaps sending a person away from the relationship and see if this makes that person think more favorably of his or her partner or not. So, physical separation is the only criteria of separation. If only on this basis the researcher concludes that the study is producing results, then it can be generalized to the population. It may not be valid, as there may be many more reasons for the resulting fondness, such as holidays, social networking, work stress, etc. In such circumstances, one may find that the research does not produce results, but they are not applicable to the entire range of population from which the sample has been chosen. Let us take another example. Laboratory experiments are conducted in extremely controlled conditions and therefore can be repeated a number of times. Such research that involves laboratory experimentation can be reproduced with almost similar results time again and again. This shows that the research has high internal validity. Summary: variables are those dimensions of objects, things, etc. that can be measured. Intelligence, anxiety, attitude, aptitude, etc. are the examples of variables used in psychology, sociology, etc. Variables are likely described into four types: dependent, independent, extraneous, and confounding. Dependent variable is that type of variable in which an experimenter makes predictions. It is also known as the response variable. The first approach can be the direct observation of the targeted behavior, where the experimenter observes directly and measures the intended behavior. Self-report is another kind of measure where the dependent variable is obtained by self-reports. In these kinds of report, the subjects are asked to express their feelings, attitude, interest about the stimulus. The independent variable refer to the variable which is manipulated, selected and calculated by the experimenter for producing the changes in the dependent variable. The independent variable also makes predictions about dependent variable and are known as control variables. Environmental variables are those characteristics of the environment which are not included in the undertaking process but may change and produce change in the behavior. Temperature, noise, day or night, etc. are examples of environmental variable. For example, in an examination hall, noise of the traffic may distort the examiner's point of view of giving the exams. Extraneous variables are those variables that are not part of the manipulation. That is, they are factors that we haven't controlled. The extraneous variables can be controlled by eliminating, or intervening variables are also known as constructs. It is a term invented to account for internal and directly unobservable psychological processes. In statistics, a confounding variable or a confounding factor or hidden variable is an extraneous variable in a statistical model that correlates with both the dependent and independent variable. Validity is an important phenomenon in scientific study, and its most common sense, validity means truth. Thus, it refers to the degree to which a test measures what it intends to measure. There are two types of validities, internal and external.